Hello, and welcome back to the Two Things You Don't Talk About. My name is Cody Schroeder, and it looks like this is our fourth episode, so let's get right into it. Today I want to talk to you about a couple of things. The first thing is not yesterday, on Tuesday or Wednesday, they had that big rally down in D.C. on the 6th when they were going to go count and confirm the electoral votes. And so a lot of conservatives went down there in order to pressure them into doing the right thing, which is, looking over all the evidences that had shown up and looking at the different levels of possible voter fraud and things like that, and maybe getting our day in court, like Mike Pence had said. And instead of the 140 people that some people were saying were going to stand up and contest the election, we got maybe 10. One of them was Ted Cruz. God bless the man. He came from a country where dictators took over control and the elections have always been rigged. So for him to stand up and contest the election and say that there hasn't been an ample investigation into what's happened, I think really takes a lot of courage and gusto from him, and I really appreciate that from his career. The fact that he wants to stand by what he believes is right, and he wants to have integrity, and I think that's pretty awesome. He's looking out for the constitutionality of things and for the American people and our legal system. Now, there were some things that happened there that I don't condone. I understand why people would want to rush into the Capitol and why they would be so flagrant as they're going along and trying to get their point across. But I don't condone the violence that happened. I think that it's awful that people have died in this incursion. I think that it's also awful that it looks like part of this might have been a sting, as you see some of the frontliners that were spearheading the march inside were Antifa. I can't say that all of them were Antifa, but we really shouldn't have allowed violence like that to occur. And the people who organized the rally have disavowed the violence and riots and whatnot. But I do understand the frustration. I do understand the idea that people feel like they're at the end of the rope, that they feel like their backs are against the wall, and that this is the only recourse that they have left. A lot of people have been talking about, taking their Second Amendment right and, watering the tree of liberty, to paraphrase Thomas Jefferson. I don't think that we're quite there yet. I think that there is a way still to take back our government without having to go full electric boogaloo on them. And I'm not one of the people who would sit on the sidelines should the day come that I think that it's right. But I think that it's important that we focus on how to take back our country and our government and the institutions and the levers of power without shedding blood as much as we can. And I think that the first thing we should do is we should contrast the French and the American Revolution, and we should contrast the Boston Tea Party and the shots at Lexington and Concord, and why they are completely different movements, and why one succeeded and the other one didn't, or why one meant one thing and the other one meant something completely different. So I think we should do that, and if we have time, I'd like to get to some prison reform. But I just saw what had happened, and I really want to get into the philosophical, ethical, and cultural underpinnings of some of the things that people are talking about. And I don't have to get into the fact that all summer and all spring, during the COVID crisis, people were allowed to go out and riot, and nobody stopped them, and the police let an entire Target get swept out and burned to the ground. And we don't have to talk about the hypocrisy. We know it's there. Liberal hive mind exists. You want to see hypocrisy? I'm sure he's already covered that. I'm here to talk about what we need to do moving forward, and where to go from here, and what is right and wrong in these particular situations. So, without further ado, let's contrast a little bit about what's going on now and why people think that it is similar to the conditions in which people fought to overthrow the tyrant King George III. Firstly, our taxes are constantly going up. In fact, there used to be whole sections that were against taxes in our Constitution, but that was thrown out with the 17th or 18th Amendment, one of them, in which the income tax was legalized, and basically the power of the purse has run rampant ever since, with increased salary and the increase of taking people's money. It was supposed to be a temporary measure in order to pay for war, much like the stamp tax and the sugar tax and all these taxes that were levied upon the colonies. And much as they probably wouldn't have been, the income tax has never gone away, has gone up. And in fact, just 30 years after it was implemented, it was already up at the 90% mark, which means the government got so bloated and so greedy and so corrupt that it took 90% of everything that people made. And to people who don't think that that's a big deal, they only took 90% after they made a certain amount. It's a progressive tax. Sure, fine. But you're not incentivizing growth. And what you're really saying is that at a certain point, your capacity to be efficient has been diminished to the point where your work is now owned almost entirely by somebody else, because money is just a value for the exchange of time. So you start working almost entirely for someone else and not keeping anything of yours, especially when you realize that the money that you do end up keeping, once you pay, your other things, you got more taxes, sales tax. If it's a person, you've got wage taxes. And so that extra 10% just ends up disappearing again anyways. You probably only end up keeping 1% after everything's said and done of that particular grouping of money that was left over. Back to the point, though. Those are two. That's like a 1-for-1 right there, as to a reason why somebody would be justified in overthrowing the government. Other things that the Declaration of Independence noticed was that there was a lack of understanding between the government and the people, where the people weren't represented or felt like they were being represented. And right now, I think, with the election and not being able to show the evidences in court or have anybody with any legal appraisal hear the evidence of voter fraud or the possibility of disenfranchisement of voters, I think a lot of people right now feel like we're in a similar situation where we're being taxed, but our representation really isn't there. I mean, we supposedly have representatives in the federal government, but they didn't even do what we wanted. 80 million people went to D.C. and they decided that they weren't even going to hear the contested votes. And Mike Pence took his 20 pieces of silver and he just Judas Iscariot at us. So I think that it's unfortunate, because I would have liked to have our day in court like he promised us. But now we are at the point where we know that they don't really care about our voice, and they'll say whatever they want to stay elected. And apparently there's only 10 exceptions to that. And once again, the only one I know off the top of my head is Ted Cruz. So, applause to him. I think we should get rid of everybody else. Mitch McConnell, we should get rid of Lindsey Graham. Mike Pence should never be in politics again. Like, the whole Republican Party might as well join the Democratic Party, because you guys haven't conserved anything and you don't care. You're not going to stay. You just continue to run along with the same old game, being the same part of the establishment that got us into this mess in the first place. And we really should have seen this coming, because the Tea Party got the House flipped, got the Senate flipped, and got us the presidency, and we still didn't get rid of Obamacare. We still didn't reduce taxes enough. I mean, thank God for Trump's tax reductions. They were great, but we'd like to get them down even lower. In fact, I would advocate for no income tax at all. And then they didn't get rid of. They didn't do anything. They had all the power to do what they want, what we needed them to do, and they didn't uphold their end of the bargain. So we should have seen this coming from people like Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan and the rest of the establishment shills that have never lived up to their promises. So that's two really big factors right there. I mean, and there's so much more than that. There's bloated bureaucracy. There's the fact that they just constantly are raising taxes and giving it to these bureaucracies that have to change their goals all the time in order to continue to justify their existence. We have the EPA. We have an oversized IRS, I would like to get rid of the Department of Education. It's just a bloated bureaucracy, and there's no control on the local level anymore. So nobody's really getting taught to the standards of yesteryear, or any of the any of the local standards and controls that have all been thrown out in favor of these giant overarching bureaucracies that have written student plans for Arizona and Texas or whatnot in DC with their representatives. And so you end up with a bunch of fat, and you end up with all these social policies and programs that have been argued over by senators and bureaucrats, and so all the executive power is all over the place. And then we have the fact that the debt is out of control, so the purse has been spending and spending and spending. So these are all justifications and reasons why a Continental Congress, for example, would be formed. But what the Continental Congress did, what John Hancock, George Mason, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, John Adams, all of these brilliant, wonderful, amazing men came together, and they gave each other their sacred trust and their honor and their treasure and their glory, and they created a country. And in doing so, the first thing that they did was they petitioned the crown over and over and over again for the better part of 3 years, in order to try and reverse some of these horrific things that have happened, so from the taxes to not being able to go west in the Appalachia, taking the crown taking all of the land, which, I mean, if you know anything about the West, the government owns 90% of Nevada and Arizona and New Mexico. I mean, so and if I were to try and buy land, I'm sure that there's some that they'd be willing to sell. But if I went out to go stake my claim and then decided to just start paying taxes on it, they'd probably have a problem with that because I didn't go the right way. But so, I mean, a free people should be able to create communities and cities as long as it doesn't as long as it doesn't interrupt the natural flow of other people's resources. So I wouldn't set up a house on a river and then just claim the whole river as my asset, because that wouldn't be fair, not only to SRP, which is a company that probably owns the river, but it also wouldn't be fair to my neighbor who's been getting power and water from it. So, but I should be able to go out into the desert and pay construction companies to run lines to my house and do these kinds of things. Obviously, they're going to need different kinds of permittation now. But if I wanted to just, have a well dug or whatnot, I should be able to buy property, is my point. And like I said, there's no saying that they wouldn't let me, but I think the government might have too much control. Though in a more planned economy like we have, I guess there are some licks that we have to take. But that's just trying to make a comparison to that and why we weren't allowed to go past the Appalachians. Even though the territory wasn't technically owned by France yet anyways. We ended up buying it later, but that's how we got Louisiana. Beautiful Cajun food. I feel like I'm rambling. Anyways, so they wrote letters to the king to try and overturn these things, and it just got worse. The taxes got harsher. The king didn't listen to anything, started imprisoning people, quartering soldiers in houses because different things had happened. The Boston Massacre happened, which was, as far as I know, it was a little bit PR, and nobody fully knows the truth, but it was something that kicked off some of the unhappiness and started quartering soldiers. So some other injustices started happening, much like the BLM protests and the militarization of the police that's happened. And then the only thing that we really have left is the Boston Tea Party, and then the confiscation of guns, which led to the crossroads at the Lexington and Concord with the shot heard around the world. So, I don't think we need a Tea Party like that. We had a Tea Party earlier that was about the legally trying to overturn certain taxes and bring fiscal responsibility back to the government, which I think is important and should be done. But I'm talking about the Boston Tea Party, where people got drunk, painted themselves red, and put feathers on themselves and put war paint on in order to look like Native Americans, and then drunkenly threw a bunch of tea and destroyed people's property into the harbor. And we think it's one of these epic moves. We've been taught it's just this epic move, like, your big boss Chad man going out there, making the crown hurt. But really, all it did was hurt. I mean, it did hurt the crown a little bit because they couldn't pay the taxes on it. But it mainly just hurt the importers of tea, and actually is part of the reason why we facilitated the move from tea to coffee in this country. Because some of the tea companies from the West India Trading Company and things like that did not want to sell tea over here any longer because of what we had done. But it's a drunken move out of anger and fits of rage and a bad placement for injustice. We saw injustices occurring, and in order to get back at the system, we raged out against it. And it really wasn't a smart move. It's not really a good thing that we did. But it was one of those things that changed history, because it did create more draconian policies and led to the attempt to confiscate guns out here in the West, which would be a death sentence, especially at that time, where there was still Native American raids and little squabbles and wars between towns, and it's just a better way of looking at it is the Old West, where you needed guns to enforce the law. And to an extent, we still need them, because, our police have guns, and our criminals are never going to stop getting guns. And it's probably best if you have a gun, should you have the right temperament for it, and go seek out training. I think that's important for everybody. But the difference between what happened at Lexington and Concord, where they stood up against the confiscation of guns, they stood up outside of their armory, they had their Minutemen standing on the line, ready to go to protect their houses and their men and their people and their fledgling country and their settlements and things like that, and their food, and trying to keep the crown out of their houses. And what happened at the Boston Tea Party, where people went out drunkenly and threw property over, trying to stick it to the crown because they were mad about taxes. One was a direct opposition to an unjust law by a tyrant who was trying to control everybody's lives. And the other one was an unjust reaction to injustice from a tyrant enacting taxes and taking it out on businessmen. It's a lot like the people who are poor saying that they want the 1%'s money, even though the 1% is the reason why they have a job and access to the food in the bakery and whatnot. Now, I'm not saying that every business is ethical. I'm not saying that every business owner does what's right with their money, but they did earn that money through free trade. It wasn't like they stole the money from people. They charged people a value for an object or a service, and that person took the service or object in exchange for that value. And so that's an honest communication policy, is an honest transaction. So we can't get mad at the business owner for running his company efficiently. That just doesn't make sense. We want them to run their business efficiently. We want them to foster competition. We want them to get better. We want that two heads come together in an abrasive way for the betterment of society. We want those clashes of ideas and opinions and things like that. We're looking for people with integrity to do the right thing, and then to provide the best possible service for the most affordable and reasonable price. Now, as a collective society, we kind of decide whether or not we want to pay something for something. BMWs used to be great. Everybody wanted one, and now they're just really, really expensive to fix, and they work really well still. They're just, the price has gone higher, and the quality doesn't seem to have been gotten as good, and you don't see a lot of people wanting BMWs anymore. They want their Teslas, and they want a Lexus, or they want, to go even further than that. Let's say that they want a high-valued sports car. They want their Rolls Royce, and they want their Lamborghinis, but nobody talks about BMWs anymore. Is that BMW's fault? A little bit. It's also Audi's fault, and it's also Tesla's fault, because they made a better car, a better product, for the amount of money that they were charging than BMW did. And that's the way that it should be. Nobody's lamenting that BMWs are going out of style except for probably hardcore BMW enthusiasts and maybe BMW themselves. But BMW has skin in the game, and they're the only ones who can turn that around. And I think that that's a good thing, and back to the point about the ethics of unrest, if you will. I think that there are times and places in which violence is necessary, and Lexington and Concord is one of them. Just as a setup for what's going on here, this is before the occupation of the Boston Harbor, really. This is before New York was under siege. This is the very beginning of it all. The Minutemen had been training to be ready in a minute to defend their houses and whatnot, and they got in their orders that they were going to protect their ammunition stores and they were going to protect their families, and they weren't going to put up with any more of these injustices that were actually getting people killed. And so they took up their sacred honor and they defended their right to protect themselves and put forward the first iteration of the thoughts of the Bill of Rights, that we have the right to defend ourselves and to decide how we're going to be ruled, and we're going to be ruled with kindness and decency and honesty and integrity, and we're not going to stand for these tyrants who can do whatever they want in their mind. And that's been an American tradition, an American thought forever. That's why we don't get rid of our Second Amendment. That's why we have a First Amendment, is because we should have a say, we should have control, we should have the ability to move beyond the station that we are assigned by the people who think that they have the temperament and the control to force us to do whatever they want. So, for example, they shut down the entire economy and locked us up for a year in isolation and made us afraid of each other. You had to wear masks and you couldn't go out to do anything. Otherwise, you would be arrested if you had more than 3 people at your Thanksgiving. And what do? We as Americans civilly disobeyed because, you know what? A disease that 99% of people are going to recover from. There's no reason to let these people control our entire lives, put cameras everywhere, and arrest us for doing nothing wrong. And that is as American, I think, an idea as there is. Is the coronavirus real? I'm just gonna go out here and put this caveat out right now. Yes, the coronavirus is real. Yes, it's killing people. Yes, people are getting sick. Yes, it can be scary. Sure. It's not the Spanish flu. Not even close. I haven't seen anybody just falling over dead in the street. The homeless population, it doesn't get to go home and isolate. But I mean, sure, they have somewhat compromised immune systems and somewhat better immune systems because they're just dealing with that all the time. So there's a lot of back and forth on that, but you don't see them all dying. They're still there. I'm still giving to charity. I'm still giving to the guy who's standing on the corner. I don't know if I've had it. I might have. I got sick for a good week or two there around the holidays. But I'm not really worried about it. I'm not worried that my daughter's going to get it. She has the least chance out of everybody of dying. The only one I would really be worried about is my grandma or my mom. And my mom's taking precautions. I'm taking precautions if I go see her. It's just the way it works. Other than that, nobody that I know really has a serious chance of dying. Even my grandfather is barely in that age range. I think he's perfectly fine. I think if he got it, he'd be over it in a flash. And, my family went out and bought a bunch of vitamins to try and keep our immune systems on as active as possible. We've been working out. So, we did things that we thought would help protect us and protect other people. And if you don't want to get sick, don't go out in public. It's those kinds of thoughts. Like, why do we have to have the government tell us what to do and how to do it? Why can't we just go out and do the things that have to be done? You know, it's like like the reason they didn't shut down all the grocery stores is because people need food, and they realized that nobody in the city knows how to get food without a grocery store. All right, so we need a grocery store. All those grocery store workers, they were out there every day in the front lines. How many of them died? I'm sure a few. Like the figures are 1 in 1,000 about. Uh, this thing is slightly less potent than pneumonia and about as infective as the flu. So less people will get ammonia, but more people who get ammonia will die than of COVID. And pneumonia is the number one killer of children in the world. But you don't see us locking down the entire economy. In fact, when people quote that the flu kills 60,000 people a year, no, the flu kills like 100 people a year, maybe. The rest of those numbers is all pneumonia, and then there are other types of pneumonia that kill other people. So it's just interesting to me that we shut down everything, and we let these elites and these betters go to their restaurants and shut down everybody else's restaurants. We let them go to their hair salon with no mask, and they shut down everything else. It's like the hypocritical station that we look at. So I can understand why people would be very angry enough to even commit violence. I mean, it's the same kinds of things with with Obamacare and with the increase in taxes and everybody threatening to take away the tax cuts that everybody just got, which helped the economy. And then with the, I would say, criminally incurious nature of the media when it came to voter fraud and allegations of voter theft. Yeah, and it's hard to prove those kinds of things, but Nancy Pelosi and a couple others, I think Chuck Schumer, talked about how Dominion wasn't a secure voting platform, and the 6 states that are in question all used Dominion, even though in Florida and Texas and others that there were no real questions about the possibility of voter theft. They didn't use the Dominion software, but I'm not saying that there was enough to swing the election one way or the other. It's just there were some really blatant attempts this time to do some really shady things, and the nature of how uncurious they were this time versus how absolutely certain and curious and investigative they were with Trump, even though there's nothing was ever proved with Russia, even close to being proved. In fact, the whole thing has recently come out as being bought and paid for by Hillary Clinton. So, and then they used lies and lies and lies in the FISA courts to get the warrants through to spy on Carter Page. So, I'm not saying that you can't investigate an election, you can't investigate fraud, you can't contest an election or anything like that. I think that that's 100% something that should be done. I think that this last one went a little crazy, and this election that just happened that with no curiosity is almost criminal. I don't think that that's the way that it should have run at all. I think that it's sad that people were so uncurious about what happened. And then it was suppressed by all the media and then big tech. And in fact, some stories like the Hunter Biden laptop that came out a couple weeks before the election was completely squashed and then only came up as relevant again 2 months later. So I don't think that was handled very well, and I can understand why that fomented some anger. And then with the promises of legal teams being heard in court, and then that never happening. I mean, nobody even heard the evidence. So we never got a chance. We never got the case made to us, why it was safe or why it wasn't safe. We never got to look at all the facts objectively as a people. And so, yeah, I can understand why people felt like their voices weren't heard. And in a similar manner to why the people of the Continental Congress felt like their voices weren't heard by the people of their day, the ones with power, in this case, the tyrant King George III. So, civil unrest, though, is a dangerous tool. Is the Boston Tea Party a good thing? When I was younger, I would have said yes, unequivocally. I just would have answered. I would have been like, yeah, it was a great thing. Us in our rebellious nature, we overthrew the tea into the harbor. We told the king that he should drink it himself and pay his own taxes. And that's a very emotional response. It's very effective. But it did create more anger, and it did justify some more stringent policies in the settlements and the rest of the colonies. And it probably facilitated what eventually became the occupation of Massachusetts, of Boston Harbor, and New York. So was that a good thing? I don't know. It's kind of like everything else where you do something and something bad happens, and then you have to do something else, and it leads to something good. Was it the right thing to do? I don't think that the Boston Tea Party was the right thing to do anymore. I think it was an emotional reaction that unjustly hurt the wrong people. But it did make a statement to the king, and in that way, I think that it was effective. But it also allowed the state to justify its horrible actions. So it became a lightning rod, a symbol of rebellion, but it didn't lay the groundwork or the foundation for the intellectual underpinnings and the reason behind why someone should or would go into civil unrest or overthrow a tyrant in a way that is completely different from Lexington and Concord, where these people had reason to believe that this would be a death sentence and that they would become colonies under the iron fist of the British throne. And there is every evidence that they were right about that. Even though up until that point, they had had a very friendly relationship and had each other's back. In fact, a lot of these men still considered themselves British throughout the entire revolution until they created their own court. They knew that they were traitors in the British crown, but they still were proud British men or Englishmen. I'm not really certain how they would have felt about it, but the British Empire, England, was the home country. It's kind of like the Byzantine Empire, at Constantinople, but yeah, I think that the difference between them is stark to the point where they were defending their home and their people and the rule of law, even by saying no, we're not going to give over all of our guns. That would be incredibly dangerous for everybody involved. And so they didn't. And the fight at Lexington and Concord happened, with the shot heard around the world because a lot of what you would consider as the main world at the time felt the rippling effects of the underpinnings of America. I mean, we, as a ragtag group of nobodies, defeated and overturned the world's largest military force and the strongest navy and the one of the richest and most prosperous kingdoms. And now we are the world's strongest military and navy and one of the strongest, I can't say kingdoms, but countries. And now we got to look at what's going on today. Was what we had a Boston Tea Party moment? Was it a lightning rod? I don't know about that. And there's been a lot of civil unrest lately, and a lot of people are trying to do their Boston Tea Party or their running of the blood in the streets of France that happened during the French Revolution. I mean, it all depends on where you're coming from and how you're looking at it. But it definitely wasn't a Lexington and Concord move. Were they stealing the election? I don't know. And I don't think anybody can definitively say. And it doesn't matter, really, in the end. whether they were or not. Period. What matters is how we conducted ourselves and where we go from here. Because we shouldn't have allowed that to happen. And sure, people are saying that Antifa started it, and that's fine. Maybe that's the truth. There are a lot of people who were arrested that had ties to Antifa and were arrested at other protests. But there were a lot of people that tried to storm the Capitol. And I'm not saying that Antifa is incapable of bussing in thousands of people, and they can absolutely do that. But it would be incredibly rare for it to have been only Antifa in this situation, just because of the way that mob mentality works. And the lady who was shot and killed trying to come into the Capitol building, she was a Trump supporter. And I think that she recklessly and needlessly gave her life in this situation. And I don't think that it's not a tragedy and it's not sad. And I don't think that the Capitol Police really could have done too much else. I just think that it's sad that it had to happen that way, and that she made the decisions that ended her life. You know, I don't think that this was a good thing. In the same way that I don't really think that the Boston Tea Party was a good thing anymore. Not to say that it wasn't iconic or an epic move or, fun to talk about, but just as far as trying to foment a change in a country, I mean, it shows where the tipping point is, where the boiling pot sits that the frog just never leaves. And we have ample reason to believe that our government is out of control and that the politicians that are running it are out of order and don't really care about us, are lying to us constantly. I mean, look at the news media, look at what happened with the whole Russiagate conspiracy. I mean, it's basically Obamagate is what people are calling it now, because it looks like even he was in on it. There's a lot of evidence that points to an idea that the establishment politicians would rather cling to power than do what's right. And I'm not saying that it's just the Democrats, because Mike Pence didn't step up and say that there was something fishy. Let's at least hear the evidence. Even if nothing else happened, I think a lot of people would have been assuaged by that. Nobody bothered to make any cases to the public. They just told them to shut up and take it. And now here we are at the 1-year mark of coronavirus being introduced into the United States. And we're still shut down or talking about it. The vaccines come out, but it was rushed through the whole process, 9 months of development. So I don't think that's enough testing to really decide whether or not it's safe. A bunch of people are going to get it. I guess we'll see what happens. But I don't trust the new mRNA vaccine. They've had mRNA vaccines working for the last 20 years, and not a single one of them has ever made it through the FDA. There's just not enough tests. We can't figure out whether it's really safe for people yet. I mean, if you know anything about CRISPR technology or about putting somebody else's DNA inside of you, it's some scary stuff. So, you want to make sure that it's right. And I don't know, it's hard for me to trust something like that. Even if Trump was at the helm, that doesn't really matter to me. The principle of the matter is that I don't want to put something in my body that I don't know anything about, or that I don't trust, or that hasn't been vetted. And a lot of people will say, well, that makes you anti-vax, but if that's the case, then you're just labeling me because you want to label me. I've taken all the vaccines. My daughter's been on the strict vaccine schedule. Even if I think that probably would be safe to just let her wait a little bit and get them when she's older, which is something that my doctor that I've been taking her to is adamantly against. Like she's gonna get the mumps or rubella at home because that's basically all she goes to. We don't use daycare. So I'm not really worried about other people's kids who weren't vaccinated. It doesn't bother me at all. The worst of it is we go to church and like I said, she's gotten all of her vaccines anyways, so it's not that big of a deal. That's just a philosophical thing for me, is I just don't know how much I trust them. And I think that in a free country, you should be allowed to make those decisions for yourself. I think that if Amazon, Google, the Google Play Store, Apple, all can take down Parler and make private business decisions and ban whoever they want and all that crap, then I think all the businesses who've been shut down this whole year should have the right to remain open and serve whomever they want, whether they have a mask on or not. I mean, why can't they make their decisions that are best for them? Even, if it's not something that the government thinks is the best idea. Why can't we as a people decide what is best for ourselves? I don't think that the government is smarter or more efficient with anything than I am. I mean, they have 700 hands they have to check. Their money is certainly not efficient. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons to be mad. I think that there's a lot of mistrust going on. I think that the last 20 years has exposed some interesting things about the government, and even before that, really. In the last 4 years especially, has exposed a lot of things. Like 4 years ago, never would have believed in the deep state. Never would have believed that the institutions that are supposed to keep us safe and secure were working for their own political benefit. I mean, if you look at it, the last 3 elections, more than 50% of all the Democratic nominees were from a 3-letter organization. Whether it's the CIA, the FBI, whatever, they were from an intelligence organization. A lot of them were for the Young Democrats Foundation thing, where they were picked out, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She's not intelligence, at least I don't think she is. She's a bartender from what I remember, but who knows? Maybe she's really deep in cover. But I just think that's funny that you see all these things. You see the media working their propagandist nonsense. Like, they choose what news stories to cover and what ones not to cover. And I don't think that the one that you choose to cover is as telling as the one that you choose not to cover. Like, they chose for 3 years to cover election fraud from the 2016 campaign, right? They chose to, for a whole year, go after impeachment for a Ukraine quid pro quo that it turns out Joe Biden actually did. And now, on top of that, they're trying to impeach him for incitement of insurrection, claiming that this Capitol building thing was all his fault, which I can see why they're making the argument and how they're making the argument, but I don't think that the argument will hold. He's not done anything like, we need to take them all out. No, he said we need to take them on. We need to fight for our country and fight for what we're doing. But anyone could tell that he was talking about in the moral sense, not senseless violence. Although I will say this, there is justification for revolution and for violence, but you have to do it the right way. You have to try every legal avenue. You have to try everything that you can do. And I don't think that people have done that yet. People haven't gone into their local political office and tried running. They haven't been barred from the throes of power yet. Some people have been barred from social media, and we're fighting that. I think we need to get rid of the Section 230 protections and fix that up a little bit. But other than that, I mean, what we're really looking at here is a political class that no longer trusts America. Whatever you think of that or whatever that means to you, that's basically what's happened. We have a media class that no longer believes that we're smart enough or capable of handling the truth. And they're going to tell you what the truth is, whether it is the truth or not. I mean, even Fauci has lied multiple times this last year about the COVID pandemic. And yet again, another caveat: it exists, it's real, people are dying, but it's nowhere near the levels that people are claiming that it is. And diseases, they kill people. That's what they do, the good ones. But we've eradicated most of the most severe, most deadly diseases that we have. And it's a good thing. And a lot through vaccines. And I mean, we live in one of the cleanest societies that's ever existed outside of San Francisco. How Nancy Pelosi keeps getting elected, I will never understand. Or Kamala Harris, how she got away with becoming vice president, I will never understand. She's from San Francisco, helped create that problem. It's insane, and then there's what Mayor Garcetti is insane. The new attorney general isn't gonna prosecute basically anything. It's an insane world we live in, and then they're trying to racialize and justify everything. But I think to justify a revolution or justify violence, there has to be a significant breach of the social contract with irreparable harm to the society, to the structure, and to the class of people. That every attempt at peaceful reconciliation has been made, that we can verifiably prove that our interests are not being served, that our fundamental freedoms that have been granted to us from God are being violated, and that the American people are being made to do things which are immoral and against their free will and against their conscience. And I think that the most important part of this step is that it has to be done with reason, with restraint, with measure, with honesty, and with integrity. And in order for that to happen, we have to become the kind of people who exalt control over one's emotions, that uplift moral character and integrity and understanding, and that have reasoned, free discussions with people of all kinds of ideas and diverse backgrounds and beliefs. And if we can do that, if we can sit down and stand up for what's right and do the hard work and work through these things, I don't think America is lost yet. I think the first step for us should be to stand up for our rights whenever we see them, be proud to believe in what we believe in, to be proud of our heritage and our culture and the things that we've accomplished and that we've done, to not take no for an answer, to not make excuses for the ills that happened in the past, but to address them honestly and with reverence for how those things were able to change and what we were able to do as a unique culture, and to celebrate these victories. And I think that if we can do all of that, and we can get back into the art of running the country, doing the hard work that nobody wants to do, of going in and serving for 2 years in your local office, or going through a little bit of a political time, maybe serving one term in the United States Senate after that, whatever you have to do to get our country back, I think we could absolutely turn this ship around, get out the politicians that have made themselves a political class of professional rulers, as it were, de facto kings, as they'd like to think themselves, and we could rebuild the country from the ground up. I think that is the way that we'll have to address this. That's the way that it could get done without having to spill any blood. I'm not advocating for revolution. I am advocating for civil disobedience and for the ability and the belief to do what is right in the face of the opposition to us and to integrity, and in the face of all of these societal ills that have come up recently from our inability to delay gratification and our obsession with sex, drugs, and the occult. So I think we need to turn back to God and to life and to love and to integrity and to honesty and to chastity and to all of the virtues that helped build society, that'll help create strong men and women with integrity, who know the history, who know the virtues and the values of doing these things and the consequences of not doing them. And I'd like to touch briefly on law enforcement before we go too far here, and what I think the problem with it is. And I'm not saying that I don't like cops. I've got family members in law enforcement. I have extreme respect for anybody who's going to put on the uniform and the badge and go out there and deal with the elements of society that have gotten out of control. And that includes all sorts of criminal activity. Because it's not an easy job. They have to go out there knowing that these people don't obey the law, and it might be the last time that they see their families or that they put on the badge that day. So I think that it's important that we give them the respect that they have earned by being willing to go out there and do this job. But I also think that we have militarized the police to an extent that's crazy, and that they can lie to us, and that we have decided that that's okay as a society, or that we can be intimidated by the police in that kind of a way is disturbing to me. They should have integrity to be honest and open with what's going on. They shouldn't be serving the state's financial needs. They should be serving the health and safety of the community. I like the idea of the old police officer in the 1950s that would go walk through the neighborhood, knock on the door, talk to people, see how things are going. And we've moved pretty far away from that. And I think to some degree it's become necessary because of the degree that we as a culture have accepted lawlessness. And I think part of that is because our media is pretty violent and gratuitous in a lot of ways. And people have gotten bored and purposeless and have turned to using drugs and alcohol and abusing things and gone down a criminal enterprise with the less hold that morality and the biblical understanding of right and wrong has gone out the window. Our integrity has sunk to a degree, and the elements of society that were probably already prone to not listening have become more violent. And I think that's a cultural issue, not between races or between anything like that, but to the degree that there aren't a lot of strong men and there's not a lot of discipline, and we have so much decadence, and we have a lack of purpose, and we have a lack of understanding of history, right and wrong, reasoning, ethics, things of that nature, philosophy. And we don't have a very uniform or homogeneous community anymore. It's become very fractured. So I think one of the easiest things we could do is start doing more neighborhood watches and kind of like policing ourselves, where we watch out for the kids when we see them playing at the park, and we attempt to correct bad behavior. Say that you come to a park and you're with your daughter and kids are smoking. You'd be like, hey, look, guys, that's against the law. Go somewhere else. If your parents let you smoke, go smoke at your home, but you're not going to do it here. I don't think that they should be arrested. I don't think we should call the cops and have them come down here and escalate the situation. You can deal with it like reasonable people. I'm not telling them that they can't smoke. It's their right to do what they want to do with their body. They're not going to get in trouble. I'm not going to make them get in trouble. I don't know Johnny's mom. If I did, I might, go say, hey, what's going on here? But, I, you know, I'm not going to get the cops involved. It's ridiculous. But I don't want them smoking at the park, right there with my daughter playing. It's not, until they're of the legal age. They shouldn't, I don't need to have my daughter witnessing a crime. And not to say that I think that it should be 21. I think maybe the FDA's gone a little crazy. Well, let's be honest. You can vote at 18. You can go serve your country and die at 18. But you have to be 21 to drink or smoke or gamble. But they want to make voting now 16 and the age of consent, I guess, 14. Because in California, if you're 14 or older, you don't even have to tell the parents. That's what Acorn got in trouble for. Is they were letting 12-year-olds not tell their parents, and were setting up prostitution rings. Awful stuff. If you remember that from the 2008 or 9, the Acorn scandal. So I think that and then as far as reforming, there are probably numerous ways to do that. I don't personally have an answer. I just know that I don't really like the way that it's kind of all the same crap with gangs and stuff like that out here in the Western prison system, and I don't think that that's right. I'd like to spend some more time researching what works as far as rehabilitation and reintegration to society, and I think that locking up people until they're 35 is just a little insane. I mean, I get it. You killed a man. Maybe that's the way to go, but just perpetuating a cycle where people sell drugs and go to jail and sell drugs and go to jail and sell drugs and go to jail is just not working. But I think that we need to change that from a cultural perspective. We need more men and women who wait to have sex so that their marriage can last and their children can be protected. And they can raise good, moral children who object to committing evil and being a part of that and hurting people. But yeah, I think that's a good overview of how I feel about the way that the police system works right now. I can get a little bit further into it if that's something that y'all want to hear. Get a little further into my thoughts about violence and armed resistance and things like that if you're interested. For now, just leave a comment. Let me know what you'd like to hear, what you think I need to improve on, things like that. I'm working on getting a camera so we can start setting up an actual studio. But yeah, until then, just let me know what y'all are thinking. Give me a like, subscribe, send it to your friends. I don't know. But let's get involved. Let's get things going. Let's get some money to your favorite charities. St. Luke's. Let's get some people. Let's get some good vibes out there. Get some good karma rolling. Whatever you believe in. I believe in reaping what you sow. I'm a Christian. Let's sow some goodwill. So my challenge to you guys is to find a group that you believe in and give them, I don't know, $10. I'm sure if all three of you gave $10 away, we would make one great whopper for that kid who's trying to get rid of cancer. But I'd like to do this all the time. Let's give some charity. Let's do that. That I think is something we can all do too. Give some charity. Help out our neighbors. You see, your friend needs some help. Help them out. This has been Two Things You Don't Talk About with Cody Schroeder. I really hope you enjoyed yourself today. God bless y'all, and we'll see you next time.